There's a number that almost nobody talks about, and it has nothing to do with your blood pressure reading, your cholesterol panel, or your resting heart rate. It's the number of functional health markers, simple, testable, everyday abilities, that most Americans between 65 and 85 quietly lose without ever realizing they were losing them. Researchers who study aging and cardiovascular health have been watching this happen for decades. And what they've found is striking. The people who maintain all 6 of these markers well into their 70s and 80s don't just feel better. Their blood pressure numbers are measurably lower. Their cardiovascular systems age more slowly, and they tend to need less medical intervention over time. Here's what makes this genuinely interesting. These aren't elite fitness benchmarks. We're not talking about running marathons or lifting heavy weights or following some extreme protocol. These are things that used to be considered ordinary, things that most people your parents' age did without thinking. But somewhere between the rise of sedentary work, the explosion of processed food, and the steady creep of chronic stress in everyday American life, these 6 abilities became rare. And the research is now clear that holding on to them, or rebuilding them if you've lost some ground, has a real, quantifiable impact on your cardiovascular health. So that's what this episode is about. 6 markers of cardiovascular resilience that are within reach for most adults in their 60s and 70s. What they are, why each one matters specifically for blood pressure and heart health, and what you can start doing this week. Not someday, not after a big lifestyle overhaul. This week, to strengthen each one. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome. This channel is dedicated to giving you science-backed, practical guidance on managing blood pressure and protecting your heart through lifestyle. No fear tactics, no miracle promises, just the real evidence explained clearly so you can make decisions that actually move your numbers in the right direction. If that sounds like what you're looking for, subscribe now and hit the like button on this video. It genuinely helps more people find content like this. And if you've been here for a while, thank you. You already know that what we talk about here works. Hit like, and let's get into it. Let's start with something that might surprise you. The first marker is the ability to get up from the floor without using your hands. You might have heard of this test. It was popularized by a Brazilian physician named Claudio Gil Uro, and his research team studied over 2,000 adults between the ages of 51 and 80. They gave everyone a simple test. Sit down on the floor, then stand back up, using as little support from your hands, knees, or forearms as possible. The scoring was out of 10. People who scored in the lowest third, those who needed significant assistance, had a much higher rate of cardiovascular events over the following 6 years than those who scored high. Not a marginal difference, a substantial one. Why would this test predict cardiovascular outcomes? Because it measures several things at once. Muscle strength in your legs and core, balance and coordination, flexibility, body composition, and perhaps most importantly, something researchers call neuromuscular efficiency, how well your brain and muscles work together to produce controlled movement. All of these factors are deeply connected to how your cardiovascular system handles the demands you place on it every day. Here's the blood pressure connection. Skeletal muscle, especially the large muscles in your legs and core, plays a direct role in blood pressure regulation. When those muscles are weak and inactive, your vascular system has to work harder to maintain circulation. Peripheral resistance goes up. That's one of the mechanisms driving elevated blood pressure readings. Strong, functional muscles, especially in the lower body, act almost like a secondary pump. They support circulation, reduce the load on your heart, and help your blood vessels stay more elastic and responsive. If you try this right now, carefully, please, and hold on to something nearby if you need to, and you find it's harder than you expected, that's useful information. It's not a judgment. It's a data point, and it tells you where to direct some effort. The good news is that lower body strength responds quickly to targeted exercise, even in people in their 70s. Research published in the Journal of Applied Physiology has shown that adults over 65 who engage in consistent resistance training can recover significant muscle function within 12 weeks. 12 weeks. That's not a lifetime commitment before you see results. That's 3 months. The second marker is sleeping 7 hours or more without waking up feeling exhausted. This one tends to get underestimated. People often accept poor sleep as just part of getting older. They say things like, "I've always been a light sleeper," or "I do fine on 5 hours." But the science on sleep and blood pressure has become impossible to ignore. A large analysis of studies involving hundreds of thousands of adults found that people who consistently sleep fewer than 6 hours a night have significantly elevated risk of developing hypertension compared to those who sleep 7 to 8 hours. And among people who already have elevated blood pressure readings, poor sleep is associated with harder to control numbers, even when they're taking medication. The mechanism here runs through your autonomic nervous system, the system that controls the involuntary functions of your body, including heart rate and blood vessel tone. During deep, restful sleep, your sympathetic nervous system, the one responsible for your fight or flight response, downregulates. Your blood pressure naturally drops during the night. Researchers call this nocturnal dipping, and it's considered a sign of a healthy cardiovascular system. People whose blood pressure doesn't dip at night, so-called non-dippers, have consistently worse cardiovascular outcomes in the research literature than those who dip normally. What disrupts this pattern? Stress is a major factor. So is sleep apnea, which is extremely common and extremely underdiagnosed, especially in adults over 60. So is alcohol consumed in the evening. It might feel like it helps you fall asleep, but it fragments sleep architecture and suppresses the deep stages your cardiovascular system depends on. So is the blue light exposure from screens in the 2 hours before bed. If you wake up in the morning and still feel tired, consistently, not just after an unusual night, that's worth taking seriously. Not panicking over, but taking seriously. Talk to your doctor about a sleep evaluation. And in the meantime, the most evidence-backed thing you could do right now is set a consistent bedtime and waking time, even on weekends. Circadian consistency, going to sleep and waking up at the same time every day, is one of the most underrated tools in cardiovascular health. Studies show it can meaningfully improve both sleep quality and blood pressure readings within a matter of weeks. The third marker is the ability to walk briskly for 20 minutes without stopping. Not running, not hiking, just walking at a pace where you're breathing noticeably harder than normal, where you could hold a conversation, but it takes a little effort. That pace, for 20 continuous minutes. A 2019 study from the European Heart Journal followed over 400,000 participants across multiple countries and found that regular brisk walking was associated with up to 5 years of additional healthy life expectancy compared to those who were largely sedentary. And specifically regarding blood pressure, a meta-analysis published in Hypertension, one of the leading journals in the field, found that aerobic exercise like brisk walking can reduce systolic blood pressure by an average of 5 to 8 millimeters of mercury. For context, many first-line blood pressure medications produce reductions in a similar range. 5 to 8 millimeters of mercury from walking. That is not a trivial number. Here's the mechanism. When you walk briskly, your heart beats faster, your muscles demand more oxygen, and your blood vessels dilate to meet that demand. Over time, with consistent repetition, your blood vessels become more responsive, more elastic, better at expanding and contracting efficiently. This is called improved vascular compliance, and it directly reduces the resistance your heart has to pump against. Lower resistance means lower pressure. There's another pathway worth understanding. Walking briskly, especially outdoors, suppresses cortisol, your primary stress hormone. Chronic elevated cortisol is one of the most direct physiological routes to elevated blood pressure. It causes your kidneys to retain sodium, your blood vessels to constrict, and your heart rate to stay elevated even when you're at rest. A 20-minute walk doesn't just burn calories. It resets your stress physiology in a way that diet changes alone cannot replicate. If 20 continuous minutes feels like a stretch right now, start with 10. Then add 2 minutes every week. The research on progressive walking programs is clear. The cardiovascular benefits accumulate steadily as you build up. You don't need to reach some magic threshold on day one. You just need to start and keep going. We're about halfway through, and there's a lot more to cover. If you're finding this useful, and I hope you are, this would be a great moment to make sure you're subscribed. New episodes come out every week, and each one goes this deep into the science of blood pressure management. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't, and leave a like if this is landing for you. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps this channel reach more people who need exactly this kind of information. The fourth marker is maintaining a resting heart rate below 75 beats per minute. Your resting heart rate is one of the most accessible windows into your cardiovascular fitness that you can measure without any equipment beyond a clock and 2 fingers. To check it, sit quietly for 5 minutes, then count the beats you feel at your wrist or neck over 60 seconds. That's your resting heart rate. For most adults, a resting heart rate between 60 and 100 beats per minute is considered normal. But within that range, there's a dramatic difference in what the numbers tell us. A large Norwegian study, the Hunt Fitness Study, tracked 29,000 adults over 2 decades and found that people with higher resting heart rates, even within the normal range, had significantly worse long-term cardiovascular outcomes than those at the lower end. Specifically, adults with resting heart rates above 80 to 85 beats per minute had outcomes markedly different from those below 70. Here's why this matters for blood pressure. Your heart rate and your blood pressure are not independent variables. They're linked through a concept called cardiac output, the total volume of blood your heart pumps per minute. Cardiac output equals stroke volume, how much blood each beat pumps, multiplied by heart rate. If your resting heart rate is chronically high, your heart is working harder all day, every day, just to maintain baseline circulation. That sustained effort puts pressure on your arterial walls, contributing to elevated readings. What drives resting heart rate down? Aerobic fitness, primarily. The same brisk walks we just talked about. Consistent cardiovascular exercise causes the heart to become more efficient. It develops a stronger contraction per beat, so it can pump the same volume of blood with fewer beats per minute. Elite endurance athletes sometimes have resting heart rates in the 40s. You don't need to get there. Getting from 85 to 68 over 6 months of consistent walking is a meaningful, achievable, research-supported goal with real cardiovascular implications. Chronic stress also elevates resting heart rate through sustained activation of the sympathetic nervous system, which brings us back to sleep and to the next marker. The fifth marker is the ability to manage acute stress without your body staying activated for hours afterward. This one is harder to measure objectively, but researchers have developed ways to study it, and the findings are consistent. The concept is called stress recovery or physiological resilience. It refers to how quickly your body returns to baseline, normal heart rate, normal blood pressure, normal cortisol levels after a stressful event. What the research shows is that 2 people can experience the exact same stressor, a difficult phone call, a traffic jam, a frustrating interaction, and have wildly different physiological responses. One person's body spikes and then recovers within 20 to 30 minutes. Another person's system stays elevated for hours, sometimes for the rest of the day. And those extended activation periods, repeated daily over years, have a compounding effect on blood pressure. A study from University College London tracked hundreds of middle-aged adults and found that those whose cortisol and heart rate took longer to return to baseline after stressful tasks had higher blood pressure readings and higher rates of cardiovascular disease at follow-up, even after controlling for baseline stress levels. The duration of activation mattered more than the peak intensity. This has practical implications because stress recovery is trainable. The 2 most evidence-backed methods for improving stress recovery speed are slow diaphragmatic breathing, specifically extending the exhale longer than the inhale, and regular moderate aerobic exercise. Both of these work through the same pathway, strengthening the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural counterweight to stress activation. The parasympathetic system is sometimes called rest and digest. It's the system that brings your heart rate down, relaxes your blood vessels, and allows your body to return to equilibrium. Here's a specific practice with actual research behind it. A breathing pattern of 5 seconds in through the nose, followed by 7 seconds out through the mouth, practiced for 5 minutes after a stressful event, has been shown in multiple controlled trials to accelerate cardiovascular recovery. Blood pressure comes down. Heart rate returns to resting levels more quickly. And over time, people who practice this consistently develop more robust stress recovery as a baseline trait, not just in the moments they practice, but in everyday life. 5 minutes. After a hard conversation. After a frustrating errand. After any moment your system gets activated. The research says this compounds over weeks and months into real, measurable cardiovascular benefit. The sixth marker is the ability to maintain a conversation clearly, recite 5 items from memory, and balance on one foot for 10 seconds. This one brings together 3 things that, on the surface, might not seem directly connected to blood pressure. But they are, and understanding the connection is genuinely one of the more illuminating pieces of cardiovascular science from the last 15 years. Let's take them in order. Conversational clarity, specifically the ability to find words easily, follow the thread of a complex topic, and communicate without significant difficulty, is an indicator of cerebrovascular health. The small blood vessels that supply your brain are among the first to show the effects of chronically elevated blood pressure. When those vessels are under sustained pressure, the brain's processing speed and verbal fluency begin to decline subtly, often years before any formal cognitive test would flag a problem. Research from the Rush Memory and Aging Project found that blood pressure readings in midlife were predictive of cognitive trajectory in older age, and that people who kept their blood pressure in a well-managed range maintained sharper cognitive function well into their 80s. Remembering 5 items, what you need from the grocery store, the names of people you just met, things from a conversation earlier in the day, is a functional test of working memory. Working memory relies on the prefrontal cortex, which is particularly sensitive to blood flow. Reduced blood flow from stiffened arteries shows up in working memory decline before it shows up almost anywhere else. This is why people with poorly managed blood pressure often notice memory changes years before any serious event occurs. The brain is sending signals. Most people just don't connect those signals to their blood pressure. Balancing on one foot for 10 seconds is, at first glance, a balance test. But a landmark study published in Stroke, the Journal of the American Heart Association, in 2022 found that adults who could not hold a one-leg balance for 10 seconds had nearly twice the risk of cardiovascular and cerebrovascular events over the following 12 years compared to those who could. The researchers believe this is because the neural circuits involved in balance are highly sensitive to early cerebrovascular compromise, changes in the small vessels of the brain that develop long before they're detectable through standard testing. So this 6th marker is really a 3-part window into the health of your brain's blood supply. And the connection to blood pressure is direct and bidirectional. Elevated pressure damages those small vessels, and damage to those vessels shows up in these 3 functional abilities. The good news, and there is substantial good news here, is that the research also shows these abilities are responsive to intervention. Studies on adults in their late 60s and 70s who engaged in regular aerobic exercise, cleaned up their dietary sodium and sugar, managed their sleep, and used stress reduction techniques showed meaningful improvements in all 3 of these functional areas. Not over decades, over months. The brain, it turns out, is more plastic and more responsive to lifestyle change than most people realize, especially when blood pressure is brought into a healthier range. Before I bring all of this together, I want to hear from you. Wherever you're watching from right now, your city, your state, your corner of the country, let us know in the comments. We genuinely love knowing where our viewers are, and it helps us understand what kinds of content will be most relevant to the communities watching this channel. Drop your location below. We read every single one. Now let's close the loop on everything we've covered. 6 markers. The ability to get up from the floor without using your hands. The ability to sleep 7 or more hours and wake feeling genuinely rested. The ability to walk briskly for 20 minutes without stopping. A resting heart rate below 75 beats per minute. The ability to recover from stress within 30 minutes or so, without staying physiologically activated for the rest of the day. And the ability to converse clearly, recall recent items from memory, and hold a one-leg balance for 10 seconds. These aren't random metrics. Each one of them is connected through well-researched physiological pathways to blood pressure regulation and long-term cardiovascular health. And none of them exist in isolation from the others. They form a system. Improving your sleep makes your stress recovery faster. Better stress recovery lowers your resting heart rate. A lower resting heart rate makes brisk walking feel easier. Consistent walking builds the lower body strength that helps you get off the floor. It's a cycle, and the remarkable thing about it is that you can enter that cycle at any point through almost any one of these 6 areas, and the improvements tend to ripple outward. The question is not whether you currently hit all 6. Very few people do. The question is, which one is most within reach for you right now? Which one, if you started working on it this week, would give you the most traction? Pick that one. Just that one. Not all 6 at once. That's how people get overwhelmed and stop. One marker. One intentional change. 3 weeks of consistency. That's how this works. Not overnight. Not with a single dramatic decision. Methodically. Patiently. With the knowledge that the science is behind you every step of the way. You're not behind. You're not too late. The research on adaptability in adults over 65 is far more encouraging than most people are led to believe. The body wants to respond to the right inputs. Give it the right inputs and it will.